remotely.
So am I calling a gathering or meeting?
No, we have quorum.
Okay, all right, well, I call the meeting to order. But first, I'd like to take a vote to allow those that are online to participate. I motion that we do that. Any second? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed, so that's passed. Welcome aboard. Do we have anybody here from the public? It does not look like we do. All right. Approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any comments or changes that they'd like to make to the minute? I would like to change topics for the next meeting at the last sentence right above eight or I want to change VASO to VASO, V-A-Z-O. Does anybody else have any changes?
I will motion we approve the minutes with the amendment.
One second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All
Aye.
opposed? Carries. Flying through. Okay. Bicycle pedestrian priorities. Curtis is gonna tell us all about bicycle and pedestrian.
Are you sharing through Zoom, Curtis?
It might not be. Let me double check that. And do you all see it on the Zoom? As a presentation?
No, it's not. It's not currently on Zoom.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah.
Yes, there.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about bicycle pedestrian prioritization. You might get some war flashbacks from 2 months ago when we had a very similar conversation. So I would just think of this as a bit of a follow-up on that. And I just want everyone to keep in mind that this is kind of just a conceptual conversation. We're just trying to keep bicycle and pedestrian priorities on everyone's mind as they move through planning and processes. And obviously, what we'll talk about here is not going to be applicable to every single locality. You all may have certain areas that you care about more than others, with certain obstacles or other things that you have to do. That's fine. This is really just keeping things high level and on the radar. So this is just a potential criterion matrix that you could use to evaluate bicycle and pedestrian priorities. And some of these probably look very familiar, like safety is always something we care about in transportation planning. But there's other things you can look at too, like connectivity. Does the project connect with the multimodal network? Does it fill a connectivity gap in the network? Does it provide access to useful or attractive destinations like grocery stores, schools, libraries, what have you? Or you can also look at economic development. I know in a lot of our regions, there's a lot of interest in tourism and how we can set up the transportation network in ways that also allow that human use. So that is something that you could look at too. And also just does it connect with areas of relatively high economic activity? And then another thing that we think is important to try to keep in mind is equity. So would the project serve disadvantaged communities within your locality? And also just pipeline, just thinking about, do we have projects already identified, previous quarter studies and previous plans, like the Jefferson Area Bike and Ped Plan for 2019, or any other plans that exist out there? So what data is there to use to back up these criteria? Well, for safety data, there's the V-Trans crash data, which I will caveat, although that can be useful, it does break out crash data by bicyclist involved or pedestrian involved injuries. It can be a little lacking in some of the more rural regions because you just, not because they're not safe, but because there's just such a dearth of activity in the region that you may not have had an accident in an area It doesn't mean that it's not safe. So I would encourage everyone to just keep in contact with local partners, local community organizations who may have insight into those sort of danger zones before those accidents have even occurred, as a sort of supplement to the V-Trans data, because obviously V-Trans data is very helpful, but it does have its blind spots and is only so useful. Connectivity data, so V-Trans, and we'll talk a lot about V-Trans because that's all useful data, but it does have bike scores, transit scores, and walk scores. And obviously there are certain regions within the rural localities where the scores are just going to be kind of low, but if you compare certain of the denser towns to one another, you'll see just higher scores. So this is just, I don't know if you can super see it on the screen, but this is a map of Nelson County, and that's Nellisford in the north, and then you have Livingston down in the south. So even there, you can see that there is a higher score. I think this is specifically walk score for those regions.
The bike score, transit score, and walk score, what those do is they tell you like how well connected different community destinations are within certain areas. So if there's a high walk score, it means there are a lot of places that are accessible by walking within an area. Transit would be a lot of places you could access with transit. So that's how that data source gives you sort of an idea of what you could potentially connect by investing in transportation infrastructure in those areas.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. That was a perfect explanation of it. It's just a good rough gauge of where there's already destinations to reach. And then you can also look at designated growth areas within your localities or locations of existing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Just where can you fill gaps in the network that already exists? And then economic development data. There's the V-Trans activity centers, which they do exist in most of the localities, but not all of them. So this may be more or less applicable to your region. This right here is Zion Crossroads on the screen. But V-Trans define this as areas of regional importance that have a high density of economic and social activity. So that is one thing you could look at to see if a bicycle pedestrian project could help serve those areas. But obviously another major consideration is just tourism generally, and how can we use the transportation system to also augment that. So that can also be something you consider. And then equity, there's honestly so many different data sources for equity. I've just listed a few of them up here. And the one you use may just depend on your local context and what makes sense. So there is a US DOT transportation disadvantage census tract data set, but not all of the counties even have since qualify as that. So then you may want to use the emphasis area for V-Trans, which has more of a sliding scale factor to it. And you can see that in the top right. That's Fluvanna County, and that's the southeastern census tract of Fluvanna County, which is showing up as more disadvantaged than the other areas of Fluvanna County, for instance. And then there's also the Environmental Justice Index from the EPA, and that is in the bottom right. So you can also use that if it makes sense in your locality. And you can always make your own sort of criteria and indexes based on household income, minority populations, what have you. It's really up to you. But there's just a lot of other data sets that exist, and I want to just highlight them briefly.
Are you all familiar with V-Trans? Does everybody know what V-Trans is? Okay. Good.
And then pipeline sources. This is a little bit different from the other factors in this, but I think it's just helpful to highlight that you can look back at what's already been conceptualized. And that can give you good ideas as to where to move forward rather than having to come up with new things fresh off the bat. If there's already plans and studies that have looked at it, they may have insights, and you can look at those projects instead of having to just do everything all over again and start. This is just an example matrix of how you could potentially evaluate something. Obviously, this is just conceptual. You can do whatever you want in your own region, but you could just do a very simple binary with each criteria where you have these 3 projects and you evaluate on safety, connectivity, development, equity. It's either a yes or a no. So 1 being yes, the blank being no. And then you get the total, you compare and you see, oh, okay, project A looks like it is more useful than the others. And obviously there are certain things that we all may value more than others, and you can also put that if you want to. Like safety is always very important. So maybe you don't even want to consider a project if it's not addressing safety in some way. Up to you. And so now I just want to walk through 1 or 2 quick examples of some projects from the Jefferson area bike plan. So this is a proposed shared use path from Louisa to Minimal. And basically, I just Google mapped the region in the top right there, but the path itself would actually move through the south of that route. So it would go through the public schools and through the Betty Queen Center. So it's not actually along the road, it's like a separated path. And then here's a description from the Jefferson area bike path plan. Oh, it got cut off. That's unfortunate, but yeah, this is just a description of what would happen. There would just be a shared use path. And then it's this green one here in the bottom right, that's Louisa County. It's the green path in the middle there. So how would you evaluate this? The spotted landing corner is the US DOT's disadvantaged transportation census tracts data. I just pulled a screenshot of it, but as you can see, this path would actually serve that area. And you can also see, I'm trying to point up there, but there's like a food line, you've got the high school, there's also a middle school there, and a library along where this route basically extended. So I just will quickly walk through this with you all. Does anyone want to make a guess onto which of these criteria this might fulfill? Any thoughts?
Connectivity is number one, or they all fit.
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree with that. I think it would connect a lot of very useful destinations. So that I would think of one. Does anyone else think there's anything else that could fill?
Because the equity since it provides the multiple access, like more sprint, holistic down there.
Yeah.
It provides an alternate way instead of just driving there, like I guess people transit as well.
Yeah, totally. And it serves an equity focused area for the DOT census data. So 100%. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
Are you gonna keep asking until all the right question answers?
Yeah.
Does it meet a experience need?
This specifically, no, I don't think it is listed as.
I was going.
Long shot.
Yeah. All right.
I love it.
I also said it would do safety because there's not currently, you can't tell them this, but there's not currently like any sidewalks or anything along that route to the school. So it could be a way to increase safety for people commuting to the school and children and what have you, just because the shared use path is going to be a little bit safer than just the road. But yeah, you were all spot on. Connectivity and equity also would work. Connectivity, I felt like was the strong suit of this particular project. And here's a rural shared road, Dyke Road in Greene County. It is the one in the bottom left pink of Greene County. It's also zoomed in on this map here, but it's basically just going from 33 to Albemarle County, creating a rural shared road, which is very commonly used in the Jefferson area bike path plan. Basically, that just means we're widening, paving shoulders, adding signage. It's not like we're creating a dedicated bike lane per se. The bikes will still travel in travel lanes sometimes. It's just a sort of in between route for some of these more rural roads. And I'm not going to make you all try to score it again, but obviously this is a very scenic route in Greene County, so you could see some tourism potential. So maybe you would argue that this fulfills the development criteria, and maybe this also increases the safety for bicyclists along the route, because now there's increased signage and there's actually a shoulder. I don't know if you've been on this road, but there are parts without shoulders. So if we added shoulders to it, you would probably be a little bit safer with them otherwise. That is my very brief presentation, but does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I guess for these situations, kind of score either 1 or 0. Do you think? Phrasing this, do you think it's better to kind of focus on certain aspects? You can argue that every project has merit in all these factors, obviously. Would you think it's worth it to kind of focus on just like a specific, I guess, like your development and safety, and kind of assign the points to that more, or to kind of look at say, yes, it has all aspects, and maybe you have like a 1 for equity and a 4 for safety. I'm trying to see if you think there's a merit in doing it that way. So right now we're keeping the part of the process and kind of.
I would say
maybe better or with better for some projects?
But that's such a locally dependent question in my view, because it just depends so much on what your community values. It's hard for me to answer that per se for the entire region, because I can't decide what every community wants or even necessarily values higher than others, but you could totally take this tool and adjust the way you weight things. You could even add different criteria. Like this is just a rough conceptualization of how you could weight these various factors. It doesn't even have to be a binary 0-1. It could be 1, 2, 3. I mean, you could just require that it has to fulfill safety before you even look at these other factors. Maybe that makes sense to your locality. That's how I would think of it. It's not like this is a prescriptive, this is how you should weigh it. It's more like you can adjust the way you're weighing it.
This has been 12 things.
Any other questions?
I have an implementation question.
Yes.
And warn you ahead of time. So this is a 2019 plan. Discussing it a little bit now. Let's talk about how, let's choose one, the route between Mineral and Louisa. Would TJPDC director quarterly or yearly update go to a board of supervisors and say, you know, we were able to provide X support if a member of your staff once a week went and talked to a parcel owner and was able to get an easement for the trail? I mean, how do these bike paths or walking paths, like what is that implementation process? And I used to be a land agent, so I'm asking you a little question. What is part of this plan? What is the desire of TJPDC to work with localities to see if there's interest in actually moving them forward?
Well, and Christine can certainly jump in if she has a different thought process, but I think it kind of depends on the nature of the project. So one is that if this is a regional project, meaning that it impacts more than one locality, I think there might be more of an opportunity for the TJPDC to sort of take a more forward facing role. But otherwise, I mean, this is really something that we would want to hear from your local jurisdictions that these are priorities. And if there are ways that the TJPDC can support that or can support staff in supporting that, we would certainly be happy to help.
I love that answer. That segues into my next question is we got a Safe Streets for All program coming out, and that I understand that in my case, I'm just speaking from the one spot we have here, we have the towns, both towns and the county invited to that there'd be an opportunity to really get them in the room and then mention, hey, what do you think of this other thing? Because this is part of that, in my opinion, Safe Streets for All of being able to connect the county to town. So I'm just using it as an example. We looked at a couple of different things in this PowerPoint, but I just wanted to throw that out there that sometimes you got to just rip off the Band-Aid of implementation, but as you're saying, it requires multi-jurisdictional support.
Yeah, and it could be something, you know, we're kind of, we didn't choose to do an updated regional or rural transportation plan because we're focusing on the Safe Streets and Roads for All, but it could be that through a process like, and maybe it is Safe Streets for All, or maybe it's another process, we do identify a project like this. Well, since we have this planning process, there's now some momentum to continue to have conversations about, all right, we all agree that this is an important project. How can we, what are some next steps we can take to either further develop it or start looking at how we could phase in the implementation of this project? I think that would come out of the planning process. Anything you want to add?
No, I was just gonna say, as a part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All, that'll also be prioritizing those safety needs, and then projects that kind of rise to the top. Part of the scope of work is to help develop what could be an application for implementation funding for a project through Safe Streets and Roads for All. So if this, as an example, were one that, you know, could raise to the top, that could be one level of support. Another one could be level of support through the per capita funding that we receive, just technical support in general. And that is directed by your team on how we spend those funds.
Great presentation. Who else has questions? Anybody else have any questions?
Just briefly, what is the likelihood of funding this? You know, when you add everything up, equity, safety, connectivity, economic development, all score much higher in a urban area. So in the rural areas, we're talking about niche areas, the few people that would bicycle to work, And then cyclists who choose to cycle as exercise, it's not necessarily going to stand up very well to something that creates connectivity and economic development in an urban area. And these projects are quite expensive. The VDOT programs require usually about close to 50% match from the communities. So just what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Curtis is giving me all the fun questions. One of my thoughts, Jen, might be that not all these projects necessarily have to be transportation projects. So there could be some, so if transportation maybe has an element, but it's not the primary element, there might be some other resources or funding streams that might also be appropriate, like maybe what am I trying to think of, the recreational trails program, or maybe even some funding through economic development if there's like a tourism, so I think part of it might be to also think beyond just looking at what the VDOT funding programs are for some of these and identifying, in an ideal world, let's dream big. And maybe the next phase of screening through these projects is looking at what the feasibility is. And then, your top scoring projects or your top identified projects may not be feasible. And that gives you an opportunity to sort of reality check those and move forward on your highest priority projects that do have some feasibility behind them.
I guess the one point I'll make is ideally most of these projects would be within the VDOT right of way. However, the VDOT programs add costs to the project. So sometimes if it's feasible, obtaining access or right of way from the property owners outside of VDOT might be a beneficial way through some of those other programs. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No, okay. And Xavier, I think you were next.
Should I pull that presentation up?
I'm gonna pull it up on this laptop.
So this is the presentation I'll be giving at the CTAA conference this year in Oklahoma City. So I'm kind of trying to broaden that a little bit so I can talk to people from all over the country. So forgive me if I go over. I know many.
Can I ask a question? So when I confirm, can everyone on the Zoom see the presentation?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Lady Lacey. I'm sure that everyone here. I will be presenting on a feasibility study of alternative fuel buses that we did in partnership with Kinley Ford this past year, and it was approved by our board in March. I will be basically reporting on their analysis. So if you have some more technical questions, let me know. I can do my best to answer them or forward them. So for the agenda for this presentation, first I'm going to go over JAUNT's background, project background context, some project goals, the technology evaluation, the greenhouse gas emissions comparison, the technology comparison analysis, the recommendations, and successes and suggestions for other agencies that we have based on this. So first of all, the purpose of an analysis like this is to evaluate the technical and economic feasibility and transitioning of JAUNT's fleet to alternative fuel vehicles based on the commercially available technology currently. The JAUNT fleet is comprised of light and medium duty transit vehicles, so this study focuses on the vans and cutaway style buses. The other goal of this for JAUNT specifically was to look at the possibility of transitioning our demand response VA paratransit fleets to alternative fuels as the market continues to emerge for these uses. So a little bit about JAUNT's background. JAUNT is a regional transit agency that's been operating within the greater Charlottesville, Albemarle area in Central Virginia since 1975. JAUNT provides public transit service to residents in 7 jurisdictions, including Charlottesville City, Albemarle, Buckingham, Fluvanna, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson counties. Our services include paratransit, rural and urban on-demand transit, fixed route transit, human service agency transit. And JAUNT is a public service corporation that operates with financial assistance from both community partnerships, federal and state transit grants, as well as local government funding support. And this is a map of our service area. So a little bit about the project background. City of Charlottesville and surrounding counties currently have a goal to reduce carbon emissions by 45% by the year 2030. By 2050, Charlottesville seeks to achieve carbon net neutrality. So CAT basically received grant funding for a similar study with Kinley Horn, which you may have all seen the presentation for that before. And JAUNT was able to basically receive funding for the study due to the subrecipient status of our agency. An advisory group is formed to guide the project development, and the group included members from JAUNT's board of directors, the Community Climate Collaborative, the Thomas Jefferson Planning District, as well as other local advocacy groups. Excuse me. So some of our project goals, as mentioned before, to achieve 45% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 and a net zero carbon emission status by 2050. Additionally, we wanted to determine a preferred cleaner fuel type for JAUNT specifically. This includes trade-offs, considering trade-offs of including operating capital costs, emissions impact, and operational viability. Additionally, to balance the current level of service with practicality of low or no emissions vehicles by minimizing the impact to operations, and considering well-to-wheel impact of propulsion technology on emissions. Lastly, we wanted to determine high-level implementation strategies and timeline of the preferred fuel type. So for the technology evaluation, we wanted to look at these fueling types. So first, we wanted to look at traditional or diesel/gasoline fossil fuels, compressed natural gas or CNG, which can be natural or renewable, battery electric, which can be depot and fast charging, hydrogen fuel cell electric. Other types we considered were hybrid electric, propane, which is also known as liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, or auto gas. And lastly, we also looked at biodiesel. So this is a visual representation of the cost of fuel per gallon. You can see that propane is the most expensive by far. Maybe I can use this. I'm not sure if they can see it on this end, but it is the light blue line at the very top. And electricity is the least expensive by far. You can see the little pink line right here. So this is a visual representation of the current share of transit bus fuel types on the market right now. This goes from 2007 to 2019. As of 2019, the proportion of diesel and gasoline fuel buses to alternatively fuel buses has decreased, and the amount of alternatively fueled buses continues to increase. I'm not sure if I'm staying too long in the slides for reals. Let me know. So the first type we looked at was compressed natural gas, and it's a combustion-based fuel. It's similar to the conventional gasoline or diesel fuel vehicles, and it can also be biofuel. The range is similar to traditionally fueled buses. Emissions are dependent on fuel sourcing, and the natural gas is primarily methane. It can be derived from fossil sources, anaerobic digesters, agriculture, and landfills. Propane can also be made renewably or sourced as a fossil fuel. So some of the pros and cons that we ran into while doing this analysis, some of the pros were that all fixed route and demand response service can be accommodated with CNG vehicles. CNG is a widely adopted technology, and there may be renewable sources which could have negative carbon emissions, which would help us meet our goal. Some of the barriers are that CNG is not net zero emissions technically, and the most renewable natural gas is mixed into the distribution network, meaning there's basically a limited number of natural gas distribution fueling stations available unless you have a private fueling station. So it has to be delivered to stations via trucks, which can contribute to cost barriers. The feedback that we received from our advisory committee was that CNG is, or even RNG, like it's not a large enough step in the right direction, and the concern over continued local and climate emissions impacts also kind of impacted our decision to not choose this ultimately. But For the next fueling type we looked at battery electric, which is a non-combustion propulsion-based fuel. The range can vary based on equipment, weather, and the number of other factors, but most vehicles perform between 100 and 200 miles. Larger vehicles can be supplemented with fossil fuel heating units to extend range in cold weather, which also allows extended vehicle range. The emissions are dependent on an electric grid generation source. So some of the pros and cons we ran into with battery electric, most fixed route services can be, if not all, can be accommodated with commercially ready EVs, and the technology is scalable to the number of vehicles deployed. But some of the barriers we ran into are the range. Most demand response service would not be able to be completed with the same number of vehicles today, and this is specific to JAUNT. Charging operations would require additional space and staff oversight. And so ultimately, like, we presented this to our advisory committee, and the feedback we received back was that it seems like a promising technology that could continue to advance, but the technology would not be enough for us to sacrifice operations and service, even though it is already present in the community. So those are just some of the concerns that we. Next, I'll be looking at the current and potential EV charging locations. Hopefully y'all can see this. These are 2 maps. So currently in the community, there are 28 public non-Tesla charger stations. There are 64 which are total chargers, 5 are level 1 chargers, 40 are level 2 chargers, 19 are DC fast chargers in the Charlottesville area, and most are available 24 hours a day. Let me know if you'd like another minute to look at that, but
Getting on the map, which I can't see that part as classes, but what is the green circles name?
the green circles are the potential charging locations. So these are some of the ones we were looking at. Yeah. And I can send you the map as well later. So the next type we looked at was hydrogen fuel cells. So this is a non-combustion propulsion based fuel similar to battery electric. The fuel is either gaseous or liquid hydrogen, and the range varies based on operating conditions, though generally in parity with traditional diesel vehicles. So the emissions are highly dependent on hydrogen generation, which can be kind of variable, as we discovered. So some of the pros and cons we ran into when looking into this were that all fixed route and demand response service can be accommodated by FCEVs, and the hydrogen deployment is more cost effective for systems with more vehicles. So if we did do fixed route and on demand, it would be more beneficial for us economically. However, some of the barriers we ran into, the sourcing. So there's no distributors or commercial fueling stations in the Charlottesville area currently. The cost of hydrogen has a significant overhead cost when you start getting into it with the fueling and storage infrastructure and the vehicle procurement. Additionally, the upstream emissions factored in. So not all hydrogen production methods have zero carbon footprint, and most commercial sources are natural gas reformation. So some of the feedback we received back from our advisory committee was that there seemed to be a lot of unknowns and less proven deployment, but promising potential. And the partnerships with the city and others would be an important part of deploying this technology. So that may take time to develop. This is kind of a visual representation of sort of the pros and cons I've went over in past slides. If you want to take a look at that, this was easier for me to look at when I first saw it and factored into similar recommendations. So this is just a visual representation of the comparison of each fueling type by greenhouse emissions to tons, in tons, if you want to look at it like that. And this is a visual representation of the long-term and short-term fuel type comparisons. So you can see that CNG and RNG are the most expensive, but they have the greatest long-term greenhouse gas emissions impact. Battery electric is by far the least expensive. So specifically for JAUNT, this is an analysis based on our demand response capacity. So Regarding the range requirements, this is a representation of the fueling range that each fueling type can accommodate by each run pattern on the left. So right here, you can see we have them, the names are truncated, but I can explain further if you'd like some clarification. And yeah. I'm sorry, I'm trying to see if you can see my cursor right here. The dotted lines represent the commercially stated range. So, you know, CNG promises 200-mile radius. That may not be technically true for our vehicles, but next we looked at our fixed route range requirements just specifically for JAUNT. So this is what each fueling type can accommodate by each route pattern compared to the commercially stated range. On the left, you have the different run names. So if you need some more clarification, I'd be happy to do that as well. Lastly, these were the recommendations put forth by the Kinley-Horn analysis. First was as a result to implement battery electric vehicles as the initial deployment technology on select run classes. Specifically to pursue small scale initial deployment of zero emissions vehicles in fixed route services, which are a significantly less or smaller portion of our overall services offered. So it would be a little bit less of a risk for us. Additionally, to conduct further evaluation of deployment performance and to conduct partnership conversations with government entities, businesses, and utilities in the area. So as for successes and suggestions for other agencies, the biggest one would be, we found it really valuable to form an advisory committee, which we believe will encourage future stakeholder engagement and support. It also helped us to gather feedback at regular meetings to present ideas and concerns that represent the advocacy groups and transit riders in the area, and allow us to make some data-driven decisions. I don't have any questions. I'm a little nervous. Sorry. I would be happy to go back to any slide too. I know I kind of went through some of the visuals a little quickly.
If you go back to the dash line ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to look at demand response or fixed order?
President, the data actually mean. Yeah.
So I don't think you can see my cursor right here.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get it. Okay, so the black line, which is in the middle here, this is the battery electric range. The yellow line is a 30% battery electric reduction. The blue line to the far left is 40% battery electric reduction, and red line is natural gas and hydrogen.
So natural gas is like what, 200?
This is 300 right here. This is a 130-mile stated rate. So like this is where each one of the services would fall in that range. Yeah. Okay. Based on like the different geography service area and the hours of operation. Is that fair to you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. I can do the same for fixed route too, if that helps.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sure. So for fixed route, this is configured battery electric range. The yellow line is a 30% battery electric reduction, and the blue line is 40% battery electric reduction, and this is in a 30-mile stated range as well. Are there any questions or clarifications?
Have other organizations around your size in the state of Virginia done some kind of study, and if so, their recommendations and match what you're deciding to do in the future, or are they taking a different path?
I believe so, but also depending on how many charging stations they have in the area, I think that kind of informs the decision. Additionally, like JAUNT has such a large service area with such different geographic areas, it's kind of hard to make a direct, one-to-one comparison, but CAT also conducted a study just like this as well. So that would be a good one to look at, specifically for Charlottesville, but I know there have been other ones in the region too that we also use to compare with our analysis specifically for a paratransit vehicle alternative fuel switching. So I'd be happy to send those to you as well if you'd like. Okay.
Have you talked to different school districts to find out what they're planning to do with their own bus fleets? I mean, they
Yeah.
are gonna be as big as your territory, but it's gonna be for border region. In theory, so I just want to throw that.
I think that would be great, yeah. Be happy to get this presentation. We got a little less nervous next time, so.
You're definitely.
Do you know where, it hasn't been decided, I guess, where the test fleet or the test vehicles are gonna go? I imagine they'd be around here, since there's so many charging stations, but.
Yeah, so it was recommended that we try battery electric for their fixed route, which we have a Buckingham Connect, there are Connect buses, so Buckingham, Crozet, Nelson, and my goodness, Louisa. But I think that's where we would start. Again, it just kind of got approved by our board in March, so taking action on it yet is kind of, we haven't gotten to. But
Oh,
Yeah.
that's answered my question, thank you.
yeah, and I'd be happy to keep you updated on.
Is future sort of deployment of additional vehicles, is that based more on the technology of the vehicles changing over time or the infrastructure availability? Do you think?
The infrastructure,
Okay.
but I think it's probably both, but
Okay,
infrastructure, I think is what we need.
okay.
Any last questions?
There's no regard to buy American for EV stuff that are part of the John has, like buy specifically American vehicles, American stuff that can make, I guess import stuff or the rest.
I can get you the information based on like specifically which technology we were looking at getting, but I think it was, yeah.
Okay.
Is there any last questions? Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I won't mess with it.
We're gonna put lights back on.
Thank you.
So I'm glad somebody brought up the VDOT conference. That's a good call there. You all have a recommendation like the meeting for the Thursday before or the Thursday after. Sorry. Tuesday, that's fine. Okay, planning. Well,
We could move it to the 20, wait, nope, that's this month. We can move it to the 18th. Or no, that is the date. It's just, guys, that sounds like a really great day to have a meeting. We could do maybe July 11th. You prefer to do it the week before or the week after?
that works. Put that over down. Wow. Before we go to roundtables or anything that TJPDC wants to talk about.
The only thing I could mention really quickly is that we have finalized our grant agreement with the FHWA for the Safe Streets and Roads for All. So we are working on finalizing the scope of work to procure consultants, and we're hoping that they can be under contract by September. And we'll this will probably be a pretty extensive project once it gets underway. We have a lot scoped in, and we're trying to get everything completed by June of 2025 in order to give all the localities an opportunity to have 2 rounds of implementation grant funding applications. Anything you want to add for that? No?
All right. We'll start a roundtable. I'll go first. Louisa County recently passed the technology overlay district. If you'd like to learn more about that, just Google Louisa County Technology Overlay District. We also the data center. So there's a list of different uses ranging from tech campuses, data centers, other high technology businesses that would pretty high paying job. And, called tax revenue. I recently, I guess a month ago, I was invited to the New River Regional Valley Planning Commissioner training, that's a long one. They hadn't had one since about 4 or 5 years because of COVID. And so I spoke on solar, which is, always going around talking solar, lessons learned in Louisa County, so I got a chance to do that. I'm happy to take my show on the road where everybody wants to.
Maybe the next meeting.
And then don't tempt me, just come up with ideas, or I'll talk 20 minutes. But other than, technology overlay district, I was recently asked to present, and we're just, we recently hired a permanent zoning technician, so we are finally fully staffed. That's a long time coming. That's all I have for Louisa.
Thank you. Albemarle County, 3 options for reviews, Jessica, I think is working. I think they got back the first round of HWA draft agreement. So I think we're gonna be working on that with our, I guess team to get that back out there. And stuff, and as we've already heard the stuff, the comp plan, we're in phase 2 right now. And right now we're focusing on identifying activity centers and working on planning toolkits so that citizens basically, these work groups can essentially put on planners hat and then kind of think about what some of the things that we think about when we want to see a good or bad activity center, what aspects are important and learning and hearing from people. There's definitely some interesting opinions on their plans that are good to know, because I don't think about that since we've been my little pigeonhole purpose Twitter all the time. It's good to branch out. Secondary station plan stuff moving forward as well, like Robust State Road paving, which we'll have opinions about as well. To keep these gravel or pavement stuff, and then Rivers Lane, that's moving forward because it's working with parks, the VDOT to kind of figure out specific dates and kind of what would be the best way to, I guess, block it off the cars without making it super duper permanent in case there's going to be other stuff in the future. And then Proclamation Path, we got our first set of deliverables from the consultants, kind of showing some initial plans of where you could actually put a path. You could keep going from Route 20 in the city to this Monticello Avenue as it ends with under 64, and then ending at Route 3 where that page wrap out as well. And it'll be interesting to see how consultants can put a bike lane for their exit on highway. They're going to figure out. And I think that's all they funny. Did I mention this meeting that I mentioned last time? So I didn't want to that I have. Okay, that's us. That's really right.
Okay, well, for John, we have been working with SSA&M to do some internal infrastructure for this been ongoing. Internal, we have submitted an application and the grant, and we are also working with there's a group of analysts and accountability to possibly a rural transit service, and we would find for the national grant and yes, it should be worse. We're going to go with them spreading.
Thank you.
Well, tonight we're having, you mentioned work session with cluster housing developments.
Can you please explain?
I did a lot of research.
Do you want a whiteboard?
Last time, I said cluster and conservation style, and someone asked me what the difference was. I was like, maybe I should research this. So they're the same thing, basically. The variations are the same thing. A further development approach that concentrates housing into a portion of available land, typically closer to transportation networks, while preserving a portion of the land for open space uses such as conservation, recreation, and recreation. In rural areas and emerging demographic transition comes to rural spaces.
So as the example of that, you have 10 acres and rather than putting one house every 2 acres, you can take that same 10 out 10 acres and bring all the housing close together while leaving the rest of it undeveloped.
Correct. So we have a cluster ordinance that requires 40% reserve area. And I think it's 1 unit per 6.8 acres up to 11.
Wow, okay.
So we have one that's only been used once and none of it's vacated, so we're gonna try and figure out why it's not working.
Doesn't it also require that they pay like higher road standards though? I thought I heard that was one reason why.
And the Nelson ordinance, it follows the private
Okay,
road subdivision
okay,
standards. I think it requires central water and sewer
okay.
over a certain.
Are the goals of the cluster one incentives rural, are they supposed to be more pedestrian bike oriented neighborhoods, or they're still just gonna be, you know, out in the woods or fields, less spread out than usual?
I think that is definitely part of it.
Okay.
You know, I think it just depends on what the locality wants out of it, but I think that's the intent, is to have open space. You know, a lot of them are mixed use traditional neighborhood design, kind of how that reserve space and kind of connected. So I think for now, some purposes, we're probably just gonna be looking at housing for the cluster style. I imagine we'll probably wait until our comprehensive plan is adopted, so that tells us where we want the designated areas and where our links to the best links to transportation and parks really don't want to be soon at all. A lot of moving pieces right now, so that'll be interesting tonight. Tomorrow night, we have our comp plan person on land use and transportation. We're moving through that, and we'll get into prioritization and implementation matrix after that. So hopefully by the plan by the end of this calendar year to have a comprehensive plan adopted, and then they're going to be also giving us, as part of our scope, recommendations for the zoning and subdivision ordinance back up. We had last month the Route 151 VDOT corridor study meeting, the VDOT and the consultant hosted at Rockers Valley Community Center. I hope there was a good turnout there. And then lastly, the growth accessibility planning grant. Nelson was awarded for some application phase of that. We're working on the scope of services for a Nelly's Ford area growth management plan, which I'm fondly referring to as NACMAP. So looking forward to that. That has once we get the notice to proceed, it'll be about 9 months, but it's looking at defined area in Nelly's Ford, where we're looking at land use analysis and multimodal transportation options. So we can open up some grant funding and funding opportunities. That was one of the biggest things that came out of our community engagement for the comprehensive. This nebulous Nelly's Ford area kind of spread out developments of how to look at land use and get some recommendations from them. That's what we're on.
Next segment.
Just Fluvanna has not had a great track record with our public developments. They're supposed to be mixed use. What ended up happening is developers would leave their commercial space and then they would later rezone it to residential higher density to get more units they were approved for. And so that's something to be wary of, and I would definitely give people know. So in theory, they're great, they preserve all the green space, and a lot of people in our county care about is the road, the view from the road. So they don't want to see these high density areas, they want back preserving the green space along the right of ways. And there's a couple of good ones where you can't even tell there's 50 or 60 houses in there, but there's some that are not that way either. So that's something we've been talking about recently, so thanks for finding it. In terms of other things, we have just a couple of solar people, we've had couple meetings and trying to guide everyone through that it's interesting. It's just from both sides, people that want to supply solar, people that are in the county, there's just a tension there, at least in our county, where it's been interesting to navigate. Went to a JS conference in Harrisonburg, had a couple of local government things, and that's really what my strength is, JS. So I've been taking some of that and building some apps for like our park system and stuff like that to try to get information into people's hands easier, because that's something I've been really hard time with, is outreach. Is we have like an email blast and our website, which is somewhat functional. I'm trying to figure out ways where we can get more information out to people and that they can give us too, because there's lots of great apps for GIS, which is easy to make, that people can do as like a survey thing, where they can write you a note, put a pin on a map, send it to, whoever's in charge, and they can give you contextual information. So, that's been good. And then, we met with David Cook. He just left for VDOT right over Richmond. He came out with some photos and we looked at the Albemarle village. There's a Route 76 bike path, goes all the way through the county, right through the Albemarle Retina Center. It kind of ties into everything else we've been talking about. We're going to try to get some pedestrian safety things implemented in 115, because it's really like a Hot Wheels track with like lumber trucks flying down through it. So we'll try to get some little pylons and grade up the road, and there's like a death box sewer grate from like 100 years ago that a biker would just drop a tire in and get messed up. So a couple things to fix, maybe get some funding for a bike repair station and stuff like that. So I think that was all the cool stuff. And I'll pass the time to Mr. Jim, I imagine.
Yes, thank you. In Greene, biggest things, we are updating our comprehensive plan. We've completed 2 years of review. And it is at the final public hearing for the board. The board's had 2 work sessions. And we have had within our recommendations for the rural area cluster / conservation subdivisions. And even though that's been in there for over 10 years, we haven't actually had any regulations that allowed it. So our zoning didn't allow it. So it's kind of hard to encourage something that you don't allow by law. So we made the recommendation to develop ordinances to allow for those situations. And of course, it's not going to be overrunning the county in any county. As was just talked about in Nelson, there's not that many that use that, because most people, when they want to be in the rural area, they want a traditional rural parcel with land around them, and they don't necessarily want to have a clustered kind of urban type development out there. So, but if 30% of the people or 20% of the people want to build that, and you work it out well with topography, it can protect your rural scenery and your rural views. So that's the goal when we do get to that. It created quite the stir. The citizens did not understand what that meant, and they thought that we were increasing density. They thought we were destroying the environment, encouraging people to build cities in the rural communities. So it took a couple of meetings to get through that portion of it. The other significant change is we redesignated some of our growth area and expanded it just a little bit for an area similar to what Tom talked about earlier. We're calling it Flex Technology Research. So it's for those military research type positions where they may not be massive industrial facilities, but they do have typically very high paying jobs. We have a commercial district and we have an industrial district in this type of business. Like the UVA Research Park doesn't necessarily fit in either of those categories. So we wanted to designate some area in our growth area to encourage that, since it's one of our key economic opportunities in Greene. And really, that's about it. Those are the main things. Well, I can share that the board, after 6 months, finally made a decision and selected a county administrator. So we will have a county administrator starting in June, a very lovely lady out of Fairfax who has tremendous experience, has worked in finance, worked in human resources, worked in transportation planning, and worked in IT. And she's been on the executive level in Fairfax. She's never been a county administrator, but her department has as many people as our county does. So it's going to be a pretty relevant experience for her. She's, like I said, she's a very, very nice lady, and we were able to meet her. And other than that, the other big news is sometime within the next month, waiting on the SCC, State Corporation Commission, Greene will actually take over water and sewer. And if anybody knows anybody that wants to be a water and sewer director, please send them our way. We do have one very solid applicant, but we're hoping for more. And in the meantime, I am acting water and sewer director, and I don't particularly enjoy it.
Not a career trajectory for you, huh?
Yeah, well, it's fine. It just is very, very, very time consuming. And if you've been in the industry and you know it, it's great. And I know it tangentially from the environmental industry, but that doesn't make me an expert. And it's going to need a lot of time, effort, and work. And it would be nice to have somebody with more experience.
Sure.
And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Who else would like to join us from online?
Hey, Tom, this is Josh. You covered our things well, but I do want to add two things. We are still updating our comprehensive plan with some additional data in our appendices, which is important to capture our public facilities. And as Jim was just saying about public utilities, making sure that those are well represented in our comp plan for future growth. And it's really, drawing attention to the fact that we have a need to do some, really detailed level looks at parcels as we have this coincidence with the technology overlay districts, mixed use, and medium density residential around our growth areas. But the other thing that's kind of coming out is a re-examination of where short-term rentals would be allowed, short-term rentals of a dwelling around the county. And we have seen a lot of inflow of population into Louisa, Goochland, and New Kent being the three fastest by rate growing in the state. And many of those people were building their house at Lake Anna, for example, and maybe expedited that or changed to some longer term residency and moved the residency to Louisa. And there was sort of a supercharging of the market. But what we've seen this season or going into this season in May and June is that market slowing down, but still a great interest. And I think everybody probably knows that last fall, there was an article that was published in Picasso's magazine and then picked up by others that talked about, Lake Anna, Virginia being the single best place to buy an investment property in the United States and make money off of it. And so that also attracted a lot of attention. So right now, we're considering a policy to look at short-term rentals as a by right use only in the growth areas in the county, which would really focus that density and that use in the areas where we want to have that density. And then require a conditional use permit in the other areas. And that would have some interesting effects on the economy. I just want to share that.
Thank you, Josh. All right, do we have anybody from the public join us?
It's all our staff.
Anything that anybody else would like to talk about before we adjourn?
Oh, I'll add, one thing that's been going on and off for over a year now. Is we have a hearing and we should have 8 public hearings in June. At our board meeting. To update zoning and subdivision ordinances, originally the emphasis was. adding the provision, so family division could be done from to the beneficiary of a family trust. 15-year restrictive covenant. And then it kind of snowballed. So now it's increasing the minimum lot size for a family division from 1 acre to 2 acres. Reducing the access with requirement from 30 to 20 feet. And then the family trust aspect. There's a lot of mixed feedback from surveyors.
The 15-year restriction on selling it.
On the, to the beneficiaries of the trust. If it's a regular family division, then it's just 5 years.
Okay, all right, okay.
You're more than welcome to reach out to Linda Buckler, my deputy subdivision agent. But we just recently went from a 10-year to 5-year, so we kind of gone through a process recently, the planning commission board of asking a bunch of questions about that. Linda's probably would be a good resource for you on my end.
Do you all have any topics you want to discuss next meeting?
Otherwise, I'll talk about solar, we don't want that. I'd be interested if anybody's going through some recent comprehensive plan, correct, and neighborhood meeting, and that's like, I'd like to learn how you're doing it, or like lessons learned from how you're doing it.
I can talk about, I can see my difference in that.
And I mean, you're kind of in the process too, you're in the process too, so if you've got anything, because you're talking about apps and outreach, I'm happy to talk about how we did it back in 2019. And part of the reason is I don't know in a few years whether we take it back on the road again. Like to find out what everybody else is doing, and I can share we did. And I think it'd be good to talk about each one of us, go around and talk about what we've done.
But there's also a really good resource we could share from that. It's the USDOT put it out, but it's focused more around transportation planning, but it's promising public engagement practices for public engagement. It's a really good resource just as far as what kinds of engagement are good for what types of feedback you're looking at. So
That's kind of the theme, is like,
yeah,
what is the hot new hip thing to do for public engagement that you're actually getting most bang for your buck? I'd like to learn about your apps, if you do anything specifically with transportation as well, which I mean,
I was looking at good things for our initial public hearings or, public meetings or whatever, kind of gather information about the way to do it. We had 2 ways that we trusted, 2 ways, listen to learn. But I have my thoughts there. If I can, with like a cool little app, I can try to do something for that, like transportation related. I mean, it could be like answering a question, right? We did, so specifically to that, we were looking at Brook Monroe crossroads. Okay, so I printed out a big map from the county with like a couple places where, like a gas station and this, that, or the other. So we were trying to have some kind of commercial opportunity in those areas, maybe just a little bit more, right? Just to having a local service that was needed, like what's needed load that. And we had people come out, print out the big maps and like sticky notes, and they were pretty low tech. We had like comments, and everyone's like, "We don't want this. We don't want this. This is stupid. We are like, you know what I mean?" Like, but I think the opportunity there is something worth pursuing. At least, like you're trying to beef up services for local areas to kind of drive across the county or to a separate county for that service. So, and that's part of our comp plan. Is like if that's something we want to promote as part of the county's plan, is to develop these crossroads or not, because rural county is, you always used to mom and pop country store and whatever. So I think that would have been a great idea. Like have people drop pins under county, where do you think would be appropriate? What would you like to see in these areas? What should we try to help with the zoning and planning areas to get that stuff? So
That was so nice. They did that for their. I don't remember what the name of the community is that they're working.
The Fifth Street project also have a website.
Sounds like we want some topics about comprehensive plan involvement related to transportation. How to get the word out, that kind of stuff.
how we get the word out. Okay.
You know, or how do we get the most participation? Is it, you know, stickers on things or app or pen or just look at all the options maybe? I mean, I'm grasping here. Do you have any ideas?
Do you-
Would like to see the next?
I have one quick suggestion. And we focus on getting more citizen participation, and that's valid and important. But in my experience, most elected officials who are responsible for making the comprehensive plan work don't have a true grasp of how the plan should tie into all their decision making.
Mhm.
So it'd be interesting to look at different perspectives on how to help our boards and our elected officials understand. Just look at the Virginia code. We're required to have a comprehensive plan, but we aren't required to have zoning or subdivision ordinances. So planning is vital and important in order to achieve the citizens' wishes. But the tools are the things that aren't required. And the board doesn't always associate all of our zoning text amendments, all of our public hearings, our capital improvement plans, our budgeting, and all our decisions. Each one of those, every time the board makes a decision that doesn't match the goals of the comprehensive plan, we're getting farther and farther away. So the more successful we can be as planners in helping the board tie in every action to the comprehensive plan, the more value the citizens will get out of that plan.
So here's my question. Are you asking this just to be a facilitated discussion, or do you want us to develop some resources or try to identify a speaker? What?
All the above.
Okay.
I think we're all at different points in the conference plan here, or, you know, like I need to do small area plans, I need to create a transportation section. Because I think we're all at different points here, we'll take anything.
But
To learn more from others than what they're doing.
this may not be a topic for our next meeting, but we'll see what we'll see if we can develop some options for you.
Tom, this is Josh. We haven't talked about this one, but I would add that the planning for the Jack Jewett Trail is underway. That's obviously a ride that affects a couple of the counties coming from Louisa to Charlottesville and into Albemarle, through Albemarle into Charlottesville. And there's a real opportunity there for tourism and economic development, as well as corridor preservation. So it's not ripe and it's not ready, but it is coming forward, and it's all part of the Virginia 250 project.
Thank you.
Same, coming up with ideas for 5 years.
We'll see what we can come up with for that particular one. That might take us more than a month or two to pull together though.
No, I don't think it's far enough along yet, but it's in the works.
Sure. We could also, one of the things we could also do is kind of go through what the MPO is doing with the long range transportation plan, which also has a significant amount of public engagement associated with it. So we could also sort of add that, even though it's not really as relevant to the rural areas. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking for adjournment. You're adjourned.
Hey, do we need to reschedule our July meeting?
We already did July 11th. I'm pretty sure you're sitting there.
Hey, Bobby.
You were present